Hey guys, tonight we're plunging headfirst into the powdery nightmare that was Victorian England, but with a twist. We're not following the high society dames or the brooding Bronte sisters. No, tonight you'll get to experience the brutally weird, occasionally hilarious, and always underappreciated life of a Victorian woman who never married. Imagine Bridgerton. But you're invisible, and your most thrilling engagement is with a particularly judgmental houseplant. Before you cozy up, take a moment to like and subscribe if you actually enjoy this weird corner of the internet. Drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and how many pillows you need to fall asleep. If the answer is more than 6, you are officially a Victorian fainting couch. Now dim those lights, fire up the white noise machine, maybe wrap yourself in a blanket big enough to double as a Victorian bedsheet, and settle in. Let's get curious for a second. What actually happened if you didn't get married in the 1800s? Did your family send you to the attic to commune with spiders? Was your entire social calendar just embroidery and waiting for the dog to come home? Did you get a job? Or just stare wistfully at people with jobs? What did you wear if you didn't have a husband's income? Were you fashionably poor? Or just creative with stains? Did you get to control your own money? Did anyone let you near money? Did you secretly invent things, write books under a mysterious pen name, or just haunt tea shops like a caffeinated ghost? Could you even go outside unescorted without society assuming you were up to no good? And how did you fill your days? Was it constant fear of becoming the family burden, or did you discover the joys of passive-aggressive letter writing? How did you keep warm in a house that thought insulation was a French word for the weak? And, be honest, did everyone really believe you were destined for the convent? Or just destined to be quietly pitied by everyone at the bake sale? Congratulations. You've just woken up in 1852, in a house that smells like boiled cabbage and old shoe polish. You are unmarried, of a certain age, and your greatest enemy is boredom. Closely followed by society's expectations, damp stockings, and your own extended family. Welcome to the brutal life of Victorian women who never married. The day begins with the gentle rattle of horse-drawn carriages outside, and the less gentle realization that, as an unmarried woman, no one is expecting you at breakfast. Your bed is cold, your slippers are missing, and the only thing waiting for you is a mirror quietly judging your lack of matrimonial ambition. Let's take a moment to soak in the ambience. You're wrapped in 3 layers of blankets, 2 of which smell faintly of camphor and last winter's failed romance, and sunlight is tiptoeing in through the heavy, moth-nibbled curtains. Somewhere below, a maid is clattering teacups, with the kind of passive aggression only possible when she's certain you're old enough to make your own bed. The air is brisk, flavored with coal dust, and that mysterious Victorian scent best described as vaguely medicinal anxiety. You glance at your bedside table, which boasts a small, pious book, a dried-up lavender sachet, and, if you're particularly wild, a single, slightly crumpled calling card from last spring. All around, the room is heavy with the decorative gilt of spinsterhood. Embroidered pillows, porcelain figurines, and the ever-present sampler cross-stitched by your second cousin as a gentle reminder that virtue is its own reward. It's less a room than a museum for women who almost... There's a certain sound to an unmarried woman's morning. The clock ticks with exaggerated patience. Footsteps echo in the hallway. But they're always going somewhere else. Downstairs, married sisters call for children, for husbands, for more butter, while your name is a faint afterthought, like a ghostly draft that only disturbs the curtains. You shuffle to the wash basin, no hot water, obviously. You're not an heiress, where you splash your face with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for enduring distant relatives. There's a comb with 2 missing teeth, a jar of cold cream, and enough hairpins to equip a small regiment. Dressing is its own event, equal parts ritual and existential crisis. With no lady's maid, Those are reserved for wives. You tackle corset-lacing solo, twisting, grunting, and occasionally offering up small, desperate prayers to Saint Spinstress, patron of women with no one to tie their stays. The dress itself is respectable, a decade out of fashion, and tailored to a body type you have not possessed since you last had hope. You consider adding a brooch for flair, but decide against it. The brooch has been your special touch for the last 6 years, and even you are tired of pretending it's whimsical. Out in the corridor, you make your way toward the morning's social gauntlet. Each creaking floorboard is a gentle Victorian reminder that you are, in fact, still here. You pass a gallery of family portraits, each ancestor gazing down with varying degrees of sympathy or barely concealed amusement. Aunt Gwendolen, immortalized in oil, seems particularly judgmental this morning. The great question of the hour: will you join the family at breakfast or claim a headache and avoid the "are you still unengaged" round table? Either way, the outcome is the same. You'll be greeted with a smile so brittle it could double as kindling in a plate of porridge, with all the flavor and excitement of a parish newsletter. Conversation will drift around you like polite fog, landing on you only when someone remembers to ask if you have any news. You don't, unless you count the time you finished a novel at 50 a.m. and nearly set the drapes alight with a candle. As the house hums to life, you stand in the doorway, half in, half out, of a world that runs on other people's routines. Your mornings may be unremarkable, but they are also your own. Quiet, uneventful, and, against all odds, oddly liberating. At least, until someone remembers you exist and asks if you've considered taking up watercolors. Again, congratulations. You've survived another Victorian morning barely, but stylishly, and with all the grace of a woman who refuses to let history's expectations ruin a perfectly good cup of tea. The morning meal is a battlefield of expectations. You sit between a married sister and a smug brother-in-law, navigating awkward questions about your plans. Spoiler: your plan is to survive this porridge and avoid being volunteered for charitable work. Let's set the scene. The dining room is cold, but the tension is colder. The family has gathered around a heavy table that's seen more passive-aggressive toast buttering than actual conversation. Silverware clinks. The teapot steams like it's eavesdropping. And your mother presides over the whole thing like a general about to assign troops to the most tedious chores imaginable. You, the unmarried daughter, are squeezed into the least desirable seat, directly beneath the portrait of your great-grandmother, whose own marital triumphs are family legend and who seems to glare directly at your empty ring finger. To your left, your married sister beams, her every movement an advertisement for wedded bliss and successful breeding. Across from her, your brother-in-law makes cheerful small talk that always, somehow, loops back to the benefits of married life, and how even his gout is less troublesome with a wife at hand. Breakfast itself is an obstacle course. The porridge is lumpy. The jam is always at the far end of the table, and every request for more toast is met with a look that suggests you've asked for a golden carriage, and a fleet of footmen if you dare mention anything you've read in the newspaper. Let's say a rising debate over women's property rights. Your father will grunt, your brother-in-law will smirk, and your sister will quietly remind you that men don't like women with opinions at breakfast, dear. You will then make a mental note to develop even stronger opinions, just out of spite. Conversations at the table move with military precision. First, the inventory of everyone's health. Married people get inquiries about their spouses and children's coughs, their plans for outings, or the status of last week's soup. You, however, are asked if you slept well. Translation: Did you spend the night contemplating your wasted youth? Then comes the charity gauntlet. Someone, usually an aunt, will suggest that since you're so free, perhaps you'd like to help organize the church bazaar or supervise the Sunday school children's concert. If you hesitate, congratulations, you've been assigned a lifetime of thankless committee work. No good deed goes unpunished, especially if you're not too busy being married. In between bites of cold toast, there are the pointed questions. And what are your plans for the day? Do you have any plans that might accidentally lead to marriage? Have you seen that nice curate lately? Will you be a spinster or a spiritual spinster? Perhaps you should call on the doctor. He's recently widowed, you know. Please marry the next available breathing person. Every inquiry is a gentle nudge, a reminder that your primary job is to stop making everyone nervous by sitting there unmarried. Your best defense is invisibility. You master the art of nodding at the right moments, buttering your toast with studied neutrality, and offering just enough polite chatter to seem present but not provocative. It's a breakfast ballet. You move through the meal without drawing attention, dodge every conversational pitfall, and carefully avoid being drawn into Aunt Mildred's discussion on the importance of a woman's place at home. On a good day, you can make it through the meal having said no more than 5 words, and with no new volunteer duties assigned. But invisibility has its limits. Occasionally, you are reminded of your utility. You are sent to fetch more marmalade, to cut bread, or to pour tea for guests who haven't seen you in ages and are now quietly cataloguing your visible signs of aging. If you're lucky, the children will provide distraction, breaking a teacup or starting a small jam-related fire. If not, the whole table will stare at you in a moment of awkward silence, each person silently hoping you'll announce an engagement and relieve the family of this particular social burden. By the end of the meal, you retreat from the table unscathed but slightly sticky, with only minimal new obligations. The house is bustling, the world awaits, and you have once again survived breakfast as the most invisible and therefore most powerful person at the table. At least until lunch, while your cousins sashay in silk, you're inventing the shabby chic look out of necessity. Your wardrobe is a museum of slightly out-of-date sleeves and mended with love petticoats. Every outfit is a gamble between respectability and tripping over a loose hem. Let's talk textiles. In a perfect Victorian world, every morning would bring fresh muslin, crisp collars, and ribbons in whatever color matched your mood, or your eyes, or your prospects. In reality, your closet is a living scrapbook of years gone by, and your main accessory is a sewing kit. Your favorite dress has been let out so many times it could star in a cautionary tale about stretch fabric. Your only bonnet is last season's style, last season in this case, being roughly the era of Queen Charlotte. Getting dressed without a husband's income is a delicate negotiation with fate and gravity. You start with a chemise that once belonged to an aunt, over which you layer a petticoat, patched at least twice, possibly held together by sheer hope. Stays go on next, expertly laced by you, as there is no lady's maid for the likes of you. Corset strings are an adventure in upper body flexibility, and every successful knot is a small victory against both physics and social decline. Then it's on to the gown, which might have started life as pale blue but now leans more toward mystery grey. Trims are replaced, hems rehemmed, and every new stain is an opportunity for embroidery. The goal is to look intentional, like you chose that awkward ruffle on purpose, rather than because it's hiding a burn mark from a rogue fireplace ember. Buttons, when they exist, are a mismatched parade, mother of pearl mingling with bone, wood, and something suspiciously like an old chess piece. Dressing creatively becomes a sport. You consult the weather. Is today the day the left boot with the talking sole will finally give up? Is the rain light enough for the velvet jacket? Or will it morph into a wet sponge within minutes? Your shawl collection is your pride, your armor, and your only hope of hiding the persistent rip under your arm. You tie scarves and sashes with a kind of desperate ingenuity, hoping no one notices you're reusing the same ribbon as a belt, hatband, and, on one memorable occasion, a curtain tieback. Family members sometimes offer hand-me-downs, with the unmistakable air of noblesse oblige. Your cousin hands you a skirt she wore once to a disastrous dinner party. Your mother finds a lovely fichu that is only slightly moth-eaten and encourages you to make do. You take these gifts with the grace of a woman who understands the true currency of the Victorian unmarried. Gratitude for small favors, and a needle sharp enough to defend your honor if anyone suggests you actually enjoy darning. The rules of fashion are clear. Don't look too rich, but never admit to being poor. Your colors are subdued, because loud shades are for the married and merry. Your hemlines hover above scandal, but below draft level. Jewelry is minimal, a brooch for respectability, a string of beads for hope, and a cameo inherited from someone who probably disapproved of you. You master the art of arranging hair to hide the thinning patches your family's stress has caused. And then, finally, you step out. The world will judge. Someone will always notice the dated sleeve, the clever patch, or the single glove standing in for a lost twin. But what they won't see is the quiet skill, the careful mending, the artful layering, the small rebellions stitched into every seam. Your look is part camouflage, part battle cry, part gentle joke at the expense of a society obsessed with surface. You walk, head high, through parlors and drawing rooms, the invisible queen of thrift and resourcefulness. Fashion on a budget, you realize, is not just about what you wear. It's about the story you tell, and yours, whether anyone notices or not, is one of quietly spectacular survival. If you're not married, you'd better at least look productive. Needlework, letter writing, or inventing hobbies like decorative dusting fill the hours. Sometimes you stare out the window with such intent that passing birds start feeling self-conscious. It's not that Victorian society expects you to actually accomplish anything significant before noon. Heaven forbid you become conspicuously useful, but you must radiate the kind of genteel industry that signals you're too busy for despair, even if your only real appointment is with ennui. Breakfast has ended, and as the rest of the house spins into its appointed roles, children shuttled off to lessons, married sisters making important decisions about scone arrangements, men vanishing into studies to do mysterious business. You, the unmarried woman, are left with a calendar as open as your prospects. You begin, as tradition demands, with needlework, embroidery hoops, skeins of thread, and a mountain of unfinished handkerchiefs are your companions in this lifelong battle against visible idleness. Victorian embroidery isn't just about making pretty flowers on linen. It's a social shield. The moment you pick up your needle and start stabbing something with it, people assume you're upholding the moral fabric of the household, and, by extension, the empire. There is a rhythm to it. Stitch, sigh, glance meaningfully at the window. If someone passes by, you look up just enough to suggest you could be working on a dowry, even if your latest project is a sampler that says, "Don't ask." But variety is the soul of self-preservation, so you switch to letter writing. Correspondence is, after all, the 19th century's answer to doom scrolling. You have an entire stationery drawer devoted to writing delicate thank you notes for fruitcakes you never received and inquiring after the health of cousins you've never met. Your penmanship is a work of art, each loop and flourish designed to distract from the emptiness of your news. Sometimes, You even write letters to yourself, just to keep up appearances for any nosy family members who inspect the outgoing mail for clues to your social life. When the needlework becomes a tangle and your fingers cramp, it's time to invent a new hobby. Decorative dusting, for example, is a perfectly respectable way to make the drawing room curtains shake in fear. You move a porcelain figurine an inch to the left, then back again, contemplating the cosmic implications of household feng shui. Occasionally, you start a truly ambitious project, like sorting the button box by color and size, a task as endless as your singlehood, and only slightly more meaningful. The world outside offers a temptation, but Victorian society frowns on unmarried women who wander too far alone. So instead, you perfect the art of window gazing. This is a serious pastime. You study the comings and goings of the milkman, the number of times the neighbor's dog digs up the same flower bed, and the progress of clouds across the grey sky. If you stare long enough, someone will inevitably ask what you're thinking, to which the only honest answer is, "I was contemplating becoming a statue." You rarely say this out loud. From time to time, a married relation or helpful aunt will drop by with a project. Perhaps it's knitting socks for charity. The socks are always lumpy, but the intent is pure. Or making lavender sachets for a local bazaar, or transcribing hymns for the parish newsletter. All of these activities are less about utility and more about optics. The trick is to look just busy enough to avoid being assigned real work, but not so industrious that you threaten to outshine anyone actually running a household. As noon approaches, you stack your work, tidy your writing desk, and take a moment to check your reflection in the window. The day stretches ahead, filled with more opportunities for diligent uselessness and the careful performance of productivity. You're not idle. You're actively avoiding idleness, which in the Victorian world is a job all its own. If you do it well enough, people may even start to wonder how you find the time to remain so steadfastly, heroically unmarried. Afternoon brings the dreaded social visit. You're invited everywhere out of politeness and nowhere out of genuine interest. Every conversation is a minefield of subtle inquiries about your health. Translation, why aren't you married? Let's set the mood. It's 2 o'clock. You've barely survived a morning of industrious boredom, and now must summon enough enthusiasm to attend an endless parade of drawing rooms, each one identical except for the severity of the antimacassars and number of aggressively ticking clocks. Your best dress has been pressed, and your shoes pinched into something resembling respectability. You carry a calling card, a small rectangle of social insurance, just in case anyone needs proof you exist. Social calls are the Victorian version of performance art. You're both the actor and the prop arranged on a sofa, sipping lukewarm tea from a cup that's been in the family since the Glorious Revolution. Conversation is governed by rules so complex they could only have been invented by people with far too much time and far too little Wi-Fi. You start with the weather. How very changeable. A segue into the health of mutual acquaintances. Yes, Mrs. Pringle's sciatica is much improved, thank you. And only then does the real game begin. The gentle but relentless probing into your private life. Your hostess, Mrs. Featherstone, is a virtuoso of the sympathy circuit. With a smile too wide to be sincere, she leans in just enough to signal intimacy. "You do look pale, dear. Are you quite well?" she asks, her tone dripping with concern, but her eyes darting to her daughter, currently parading past in a fresh set of ringlets, just in case any eligible bachelor should accidentally wander through the parlor. You assure Mrs. Featherstone that you're perfectly healthy, thank you, and that, yes, your cousin's wedding was simply lovely, and no, you didn't catch the bouquet. If you thought this was the end, you have underestimated the stamina of Victorian small talk. Next up, the unsolicited advice. Mrs. Featherstone's favorite topic is eligible men, preferably those recently widowed, slightly gouty, or believed to have excellent prospects. Translation: owns a horse and hasn't been convicted of anything major. Have you met the new curate? She asks. He's fond of poetry. I'm sure you'd get on splendidly. You nod, smile, and make a note to avoid the church vestibule for the next 6 months. Every so often, another unmarried woman is present, a fellow survivor of the pity circuit. You share a look, a subtle alliance forged in mutual understanding, and the knowledge that you will both be offered a slice of fruitcake and a catalogue of improving pursuits. Needlework circles, charitable visits to the indigent, possibly a subscription to the Ladies' Temperance Gazette. For a moment you consider starting a secret club, the Society of Surviving Social Calls, motto: we will not marry for tea and sympathy. The real challenge is maintaining composure when someone, usually an overzealous aunt, mentions your independence in a way that sounds suspiciously like a warning label. It must be so restful, having only yourself to look after. No noisy children, no husband's muddy boots, no responsibilities. The room nods sagely, as though you've been granted a rare and tragic freedom, like inheriting a haunted house. Tea is poured, cake is distributed, and the conversation circles back to the latest local scandal. A fox in the vicarage, a maid caught with the gardener, someone's petticoats scandalously visible in broad daylight. All the while, you maintain a pleasant, impenetrable expression, the kind that says, I am both listening and not listening. You become adept at redirecting questions, shifting the spotlight with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. No, you're not lonely. No, you're not unwell. No, you haven't considered taking up millinery as a career. Yes, you did hear about the weather. You've heard nothing but weather for 6 weeks. Finally, the visit ends. You thank your hosts, offer polite farewells, and walk home with the brisk efficiency of someone escaping a burning building. You replay the conversations in your head, marveling at your own diplomatic finesse. You made it out without promising to host a sewing circle or agreeing to meet the curate. In Victorian society, that's practically a win. By the time you return home, the shadows are longer, your feet are sore, and you are free, at least until tomorrow's invitations arrive and the circuit begins anew. You pour yourself a cup of strong tea, put your feet up, and toast your survival. Another day as an unwed woman, another round of pity politely deflected, and not a single engagement in sight. Victorian society loves a good rule, and unmarried women get a whole appendix. No unchaperoned walks, no loud laughter, no opinions, unless it's about the weather or Queen Victoria's latest hat. From the moment you awaken to the gentle clanging of the breakfast bell, the expectations begin. As an unmarried woman in Victorian England, you are governed not just by the usual catalogue of social commandments, but by a separate, secret menu of regulations known only to those who have been left off the marriage register. Spinster etiquette is less a set of helpful guidelines and more of an ever-shifting labyrinth overseen by a league of aunts, matrons, and the vicar's wife, all with a sixth sense for detecting scandal. First, let's address movement. You must not be seen wandering the village without a suitable chaperone. Ideally, a blood relative or a friend's mother who knits in public and can vouch for your virtue. Heaven forbid you're caught enjoying a solo stroll. A walk by yourself is an open invitation for rumours, and rumours are Victorian England's favourite indoor sport. Strolling alone means either you're a dangerously independent spirit, or, even worse, in search of something. No one specifies what that something is, but the assumption hangs in the air like a faint whiff of scandalous French perfume. Then there's laughter, a treacherous business at the best of times. Unmarried women may chuckle, titter, or smile softly behind a gloved hand. But real, unrestrained laughter is considered the exclusive right of men, children, and those who've already secured a husband. Laughing too loud, or, heaven forfend, snorting, is grounds for immediate social suspicion. Best to confine your amusement to polite halms and the occasional eyebrow raise, especially if you find yourself in the presence of anyone with a double-barreled surname. And let's talk about conversation. You may have spent your morning reading, say, Darwin or a 3-volume novel about Italian unification, but your conversational options are limited. Stick to the safe and thrilling topics: weather patterns, the health of distant relatives, the cost of coal, and Queen Victoria's millinery choices. Never express opinions about politics, science, or the merits of sensible shoes. If you do, you risk being labelled eccentric, which is Victorian code for won't be invited back. If you have to share an opinion, make it about the relative merits of rose versus lavender sachets, or which kind of lace holds up best in damp weather. Spinster etiquette is also an endless dance of avoidance. You learn to dodge invitations to potentially embarrassing events, like church matchmaking picnics or the annual bachelor's tea. If you do attend, your job is to be useful but never conspicuous, helpful but never commanding. Lead a hymn sing-along? Acceptable. Lead a heated discussion on the corn laws? Catastrophic. Clothing comes with its own set of rules. Hemlines must be neither too short, improper, nor too long, melancholy. Colours should be subdued, like your ambitions. You must always wear a hat outdoors, sunbonnets in the garden, straw for market, and a tidy black bonnet for funerals, including, sometimes, your own social life. Jewelry is minimal and always tasteful, lockets with dead relatives inside, brooches with forget-me-nots, and never, under any circumstances, anything that jingles. Of course, all these rules are enforced by a shadowy council of gossips whose only job is to notice if you're late for church or if you forgot your gloves at the tea table. Their greatest joy comes from watching an unmarried woman falter. They have the memory of elephants and the subtlety of foghorns. But if you master the etiquette, if you walk the tightrope with poise, deflecting questions with the gentle art of polite nothingness, there is a strange, subtle freedom in your invisibility. You are everywhere and nowhere, following rules written for a world that always seems to belong to someone else. And while the etiquette of spinsterhood is designed to keep you contained, you learn, in your own quiet way, to bend the rules just enough to make space for yourself, and maybe, just maybe, a little secret laughter when no one is looking. Maybe your family's funds are running low, or you crave a taste of freedom. Options range from teaching and governessing to the high-stakes world of acceptable female employment, all with wages so low, even your cat judges you. Let's be clear. Work for the unmarried Victorian woman is less about economic independence and more about surviving respectably while disappointing the maximum number of relatives. In theory, employment is admirable, proof of your sturdy moral character and a useful way to keep you out of mischief. In practice, it's a delicate dance on the razor's edge of propriety. The goal is to be productive, but never too ambitious. Occupied, but never actually self-sufficient. After all, no one wants you getting ideas. Teaching is the gold standard of respectable work. If you're lucky, you'll snag a position at a girls' academy with strict rules and stricter uniforms. Here, you're paid to impart the essential skills: penmanship, French verbs, the precise angle of a proper curtsy, and the all-important art of silent suffering. You may also be responsible for supervising needlework, correcting posture, and, should disaster strike. Mediating hair ribbon disputes. The wages are just enough to afford you new gloves every other year, and the luxury of wondering if you'll ever taste imported fruit again. For the daring or simply desperate, there's the life of a governess. Think of it as teaching, but with the added challenge of being neither family nor servant, a kind of professional houseplant who educates children in algebra, Latin, and, most importantly, how to not set the drapes on fire during chemistry lessons. You eat your meals alone. You exist in a social no man's land, and you learn to survive on an emotional diet of cold mutton and polite condescension. Some days, you're the only literate person in a 50-mile radius. Other days, you're mistaken for a decorative umbrella stand. It's an adventure if your definition of adventure includes deep existential questioning at 4 p.m. Of course, there are other acceptable pursuits. You might become a lady's companion, a sort of professional friend and conversational speed bump for the elderly, well-off, and easily startled. This job requires a high tolerance for repetition, gentle hands for endless rounds of whist, and the ability to feign interest in the comparative merits of gout remedies. Compensation, a modest allowance, the occasional fruitcake, and a front-row seat to every argument about who gets what when the will is read. Creative types might take up fancy work, the genteel hustle of selling embroidered handkerchiefs, painted greeting cards, or, for the especially bold, watercolors of local ruins. Your customer base is mainly your own family, and the prices are set by Aunt Hester, who claims to be supporting your enterprise while haggling you down to less than the cost of postage. On a good day, you might net enough to buy a new spool of thread. On a bad day, you consider selling actual lemonade on the actual street, until you remember that's a gateway to scandal and probable expulsion from the parish sewing circle. Publishing is possible too, if you're ready to navigate the treacherous shoals of pen names, anonymous, and the iron grip of the male-dominated publishing world. Should you succeed, prepare to be accused of everything from moral decline to witchcraft, or worse, being unladylike. You'd think writing about orphans and tragic governesses would be safe. But Victorian England is always ready to pounce on a woman with too many opinions or too much imagination. And let's not forget charity work, which doesn't pay, but counts as occupation. If you're really out of luck, your family might send you to supervise soup kitchens or organize bazaars. Jobs with all the responsibility of real employment and none of the financial reward. The only thing you'll earn is the respect of other spinsters and the right to knit in church without comment. By the end of the week, your wallet is still light, your relatives are still worried, and your cat is still staring at you like you should have tried harder in embroidery class. But you are working, respectably, invisibly, and within the tiny, suffocating boundaries society drew for you. And sometimes, just for a moment, you taste a little freedom, even if it's only the freedom to complain about your wages to the nearest friendly houseplant. Inheritance is tricky, unless you're a rich aunt, in which case you suddenly have a lot of close family. The law barely lets you keep your own handkerchief, and every will reading feels like the Hunger Games in bonnets. Let's talk about money, the kind you almost never get to see if you're an unmarried Victorian woman. The rules of inheritance are less rules and more a series of cruel pranks played by Parliament. Technically, you might inherit something from a kindly uncle or parent, but in practice, every penny, teaspoon, and half-finished embroidery project is first filtered through a legal system written by men who never intended for women to handle actual assets. If you're the daughter of a gentleman, you might receive a dowry, intended solely to make you marriageable. If you never marry, your dowry becomes a ghostly sum, floating through family ledgers and reappearing at awkward intervals when your cousins need new horses. Wills, of course, are an entire genre of Victorian entertainment. Picture the family gathered in the drawing room, everyone pretending they haven't spent the last 3 months plotting to accidentally move up in the pecking order. The solicitor enters with a sheaf of papers and a face that says, "I know all your secrets." Unmarried, women clutch their handkerchiefs, hoping for at least a token, maybe a brooch or a basket of monogrammed napkins. The suspense builds as each item is announced. To my eldest son, the estate, naturally. To my devoted wife, the carriage and pair, she's earned it. And to my niece, Penelope, in appreciation for her patience, this collection of inspirational sermons and a modest annuity of £10 a year. It's a moment both humbling and humiliating. If you're very unlucky, the will is read aloud by your least favourite cousin, who savours every line. Even if you do inherit something tangible, the law can still make it vanish, until the Married Women's Property Act, which didn't exist until 1870, and then only in its shakiest form, women's wealth belonged to their husbands upon marriage. If you were smart enough to stay single, your freedom is constantly threatened by helpful relatives eager to manage your affairs, usually by investing your money in whatever promising railway stock is about to go bankrupt. If you protest, you are accused of being ungrateful or, worse, difficult. Of course, if you are one of the rare creatures, a woman of property, a rich aunt, your social calendar fills up instantly. Cousins who previously forgot your birthday now invite you to tea. Nieces flatter your choice of shawl. The family suddenly takes a keen interest in your health, gently suggesting you get more fresh air, but not too much in case you catch something, and offering helpful advice on sensible investments. Behind every polite smile is a feverish calculation. How much longer will Aunt Mildred last? And what can I do to improve my odds? You become the most popular figure at family gatherings, the human equivalent of a lottery ticket that has yet to be scratched. And then, of course, there are the disputes. Nothing brings out Victorian family unity quite like a fight over a soup tureen. Lawsuits are threatened, letters are exchanged, and somewhere, in the background, a minor cousin is dispatched to search the attic for any additional codicils. If you dare to contest anything, perhaps the distribution of the family silver or the true owner of Great-Uncle Edmund's hat collection, you're accused of greed, or even worse, not knowing your place. Men take charge, women are expected to smile, and the unmarried are handed whatever is left when the dust settles, a chipped teacup, a prayer book, or a vague promise of being remembered in someone else's will. For most spinsters, financial security is a patchwork of tiny inheritances, careful thrift, and the occasional gift from a grateful sibling. True independence, a bank account in your own name, investments you control, the right to actually buy property, remains a distant fantasy. You become an expert in making do, stretching every shilling and always hoping that some distant relative will have a change of heart or an unfortunate fall from a horse. In the end, the great inheritance debate is less about money and more about power. The power to choose, to say no, to live beyond other people's generosity. And if all else fails, there's always the comfort of knowing that while the law might not let you keep your fortune, at least you can haunt your relatives' dreams with tales of the pearls they never got. Your room is both haven and cell. Here you dream of escape, plot imaginary adventures, and try not to think about the suspiciously large number of doilies. The wallpaper is watching, and it's judging. Let's take a gentle, creaking step inside. Your bedroom, sometimes called a boudoir by optimistic relatives, is where you begin and end your days as an unmarried Victorian woman. At first glance, it's everything you might wish for. A tidy private space with a small window, a narrow bed, and an army of sentimental objects arranged for maximum moral support. There are shelves of books you've half read, a writing desk cluttered with inky quills and secret letters, and that faint lavender smell that comes from keeping your linens wrapped tightly in hopes of deterring both moths and melancholy. But the longer you linger, the more it feels like a well-upholstered holding cell. The room is decorated to reflect your status. Not a child, not a matron, just something in between. Everything is neat, unthreatening, and slightly faded, as though designed by someone determined to avoid giving offense to even the most sensitive aunt. The lace curtains are just transparent enough to keep you visible to neighbors, but not the world. The bed, made with military precision by a maid who never quite remembers your birthday, is simultaneously the softest refuge in the house, and the only place where you can lie awake and listen to the echo of your own thoughts. This is your empire, a small, slightly dusty kingdom where you can read what you want, write what you please, and daydream with wild, rebellious abandon, as long as you're quiet about it. You're free to arrange your combs and hairpins in an order no one else understands, to hide forbidden novels behind religious tracts, and to practice your signature in 3 different styles, just in case you ever become famous or scandalous. But every haven has its shadows. The walls are thick with reminders of what you aren't. Wedding portraits of siblings, faded invitations to parties you once attended as a hopeful debutante, and more doilies than any one person could possibly need, each one an indirect gift, embroidered by well-meaning relatives, eager to keep your hands and your mind busy. And then there's the wallpaper. Ornate, floral, and far too attentive. You could swear it shifts ever so slightly when you're not looking. A silent audience for every sigh and secret tear. Your belongings are a museum of almosts. The pale blue shawl you wore to the engagement party where your childhood crush proposed to someone else. The pressed flower from a book club meeting you attended before you realized you'd be leading it forever. The locked box under your bed where you keep letters from friends who have since disappeared into marriage, motherhood, or scandal of scandals. A life abroad. Time, in this space, moves in strange ways. On rainy afternoons, you curl up with a battered novel and let your imagination wander anywhere but here. In the evenings, you write letters to distant cousins and never send them. You might even spend an hour or 2 embroidering yet another cushion cover, wondering if the final product will end up on the parlor sofa or quietly smuggled into your hope chest. There's a quiet rebellion in these rituals. Your bedroom, for all its velvet constraints and stifling decor, is also the one place where you can truly exist outside the gaze of your family and the rules of society. Here, you can laugh at your own jokes, invent elaborate fantasies of adventure, and occasionally lie flat on the bed and daydream about a world in which spinster is just another word for unapologetically free. Still, at the end of the day, when the house quiets and the only sounds are your own breathing and the relentless ticking of a wind-up clock, you're left with the strange paradox of the spinster's bedroom. It's safe, familiar, and entirely yours, but it's also the room you return to, alone, again and again, a sanctuary and a prison, all in one, with just enough hope hidden in the corners to keep you dreaming. With no husband to impress or children to wrangle, you develop talents. Secret writing, clandestine painting, maybe even dabbling in radical ideas like, gasp, reading novels after 10 p.m. When you're a Victorian woman of a certain age with no one monitoring your every movement, except for the occasional nosy aunt, an overzealous maid, and that one cousin who's convinced you're hiding suitors under the floorboards, you learn the luxury and the necessity of cultivating secret skills. There's only so much needlework and polite letter writing a person can take before the mind starts itching for something more, something that belongs to you and you alone. It starts innocently. Maybe you borrow a brother's book on Greek mythology, carefully hiding it beneath your copy of Virtuous Living for the Faint of Heart. Or you pick up a pencil and sketch the cat napping in the sun, knowing full well that true art in this house is reserved for ancestors painted by people with French surnames. The secrecy is half the fun. Every hidden poem, every quietly brilliant watercolor, every half-finished story tucked between the pages of your prayer book is an act of tiny rebellion. Soon your room becomes a clandestine workshop. The writing desk is more than a place to answer correspondence. It's a launch pad for literary experiments. Maybe you're crafting thinly veiled stories about your own relatives, transforming Cousin Henry into an insufferable villain, or turning the vicar's wife into an amateur detective. Your journals are a blend of witty observations, coded rants about family life, and fictionalized adventures starring a heroine who is suspiciously unmarried and suspiciously clever. If words aren't your thing, perhaps your talents lean toward music. When the rest of the house sleeps, you tiptoe to the old pianoforte and improvise tunes you'd never dare perform at the charity concert. Or maybe you hum folk songs that would send your great-aunt into fits of genteel horror, just to see if the wallpaper twitches in disapproval. There's no applause, of course. Just the soft satisfaction of knowing you created something that existed solely because you wanted it to. Art supplies, meanwhile, become contraband. Watercolors hidden in old sewing boxes. Scraps of canvas rolled beneath the bed. Even the forbidden joy of charcoal sketches in the margins of recipe books. You learn to paint landscapes from memory and copy the shape of a teacup with a precision that would impress the Royal Academy, if only they allowed submissions from people with your last name and your lack of marital prospects. And then there's reading, not the approved improving volumes, but the thrilling, improper novels that circulate between like-minded friends under the table at tea. Sometimes you and a trusted companion trade dog-eared copies of Bronte or Austen, agreeing to discuss only in code so that Aunt Prudence doesn't suspect you're corrupting your mind with tales of stubborn heroines and men who actually listen. On especially bold nights, you stay up past 10, devouring 3 chapters by candlelight and waking up with ink stains on your fingers, a badge of honor in the secret society of literary insomniacs. What ties all these hidden talents together is the knowledge that, in the eyes of Victorian society, none of them count for much. You're expected to be quiet, ornamental, and infinitely available for errands, not to be a painter, writer, or philosopher. But in the quiet of your room, or in stolen moments between social obligations, you become someone else, someone who shapes the world with imagination, wit, and maybe a little spite. And though no one may ever know the full extent of your secret genius, there's a quiet joy in doing it anyway. You're unmarried, unnoticed, unstoppable. You're the unsung creator of beauty, laughter, and rebellion. A one-woman revolution in petticoats and ink. Content to let the world believe you're simply very devoted to your embroidery. The simple pleasure of a walk is complicated by chaperones and nosy neighbors. Step outside unaccompanied, and you're either the talk of the town or the subject of whispered prayers. Let's lace up your most respectable boots and venture beyond the front gate. A risky expedition, given that Victorian England has turned even a stroll through the park into a high-stakes social obstacle course. Unlike your married sisters, who can parade down the lane with a husband in tow and an armful of children as their license to exist in public, you, the unmarried woman, are subject to a different set of rules. If you're seen wandering without an escort, neighbors immediately suspect you're either on a secret mission or on the brink of moral collapse. The first challenge, the chaperone. Your official walking companion might be your mother, who considers brisk exercise a symptom of youthful rebellion. A much younger cousin, who would rather be climbing trees. Or, in truly dire circumstances, the family dog, provided it's a dog of sufficiently unimpeachable character. There are, of course, unspoken guidelines for choosing a chaperone. Ideally, someone too boring to generate gossip, but not so boring they fall asleep mid-stride, leaving you exposed to scandal and possibly a draft. If, by miracle or family oversight, you manage to slip outside alone, the world transforms into a gauntlet of judgment. Shopkeepers nod, but only after a pause long, enough to imply, should you really be out by yourself? Elderly ladies on benches give you the sort of up-and-down glance usually reserved for suspicious mushrooms. Even the vicar's wife, peering through her lace curtains, seems to be taking notes for her next prayer request list. You adopt a purposeful stride, aiming for that delicate balance between I'm on a virtuous errand and I have absolutely nothing to hide, except my entire personality. Your route must be carefully selected, too close to the market, and you're accused of being overly interested in bargains. Too far out into the countryside, and you're accused of wanting to commune with the farmhands. The safest option, paradoxically, is the churchyard, which at least lends your steps a pious glow, assuming you don't linger too long by the gravestones. Everyone knows only poets and troublemakers loiter there. The truth is, walking alone is more than an act of transportation. It's a delicate, silent rebellion. There's a giddy freedom in feeling the sun on your face and the gravel crunching underfoot. Just you, the wind, and the ever-present threat of being reported for walking too enthusiastically. As you pass familiar houses, you hear snippets of conversation, little shreds of gossip fluttering in the air. Someone's niece ran off with a curate. Someone else's cousin was seen buying lemons on a Sunday. Scandalous. And the miller's daughter is suspected of having thoughts above her station. It's a reminder that, in this world, every step you take is subject to collective analysis by a population with far too much time and an unlimited appetite for speculation. Sometimes you find small moments of peace. A quiet lane, a garden blooming behind a neighbor's wall, or the blessed absence of relatives. You pause, pretend to examine a rose bush, and let yourself imagine being somewhere else. Perhaps Paris, or even just a version of your own town where nobody cares whether you have a chaperone or a wedding ring. But soon, the sound of a distant cough or the sight of an approaching acquaintance propels you back onto the approved path. On the walk home, you rehearse answers to the inevitable questions. Where have you been? Admiring the weather, as one does. Did you see anyone? Only Mrs. Hargreaves' cat, and I assure you, our conversation was strictly above board. By the time you reach your door, you've constructed an alibi worthy of a Victorian detective novel, just in case your mother asks for a full report. Still, as you close the garden gate behind you, there's a sense of accomplishment. You've navigated the minefield of afternoon propriety, evaded the watchful eyes of the neighborhood, and enjoyed a taste, however fleeting, of independence. In a world that measures virtue by the number of footsteps taken in company, sometimes the boldest thing you can do is walk alone. Correspondence is your lifeline. Letters to faraway friends are coded with secrets, gossip, and the latest news from the marriage front. Your quill is sharper than any tongue in the county. Long before anyone invented status updates or group chats, the unmarried Victorian woman perfected the art of correspondence, a high-wire act of pen, paper, and thinly veiled sarcasm, The morning's obligations have been survived. Now, armed with a fresh sheet of stationery and enough ink to drown a small hedgehog, you settle in to broadcast your carefully curated life to a select audience of sisters, school friends, and the odd cousin who married well and now insists on living in Bath. Each letter is a blend of news and coded confessions, composed at your writing desk while the household clatters around you. The first rule: never write exactly what you mean. The second rule: always write more than you say. I was much delighted to see Mrs. Willoughby at tea can mean anything from "I endured her for 2 hours" to "ingeme." She showed up with a hat so dreadful, even the aspidistra wilted. You swap stories of small triumphs and minor disasters. A dropped pudding, a foiled proposal. The discovery that Mr. Turner is definitely not as rich as he appears. All of it is threaded with a wit that would make Oscar Wilde proud. If only he were allowed in your drawing room. Letters serve as both confession booth and sounding board. You vent about the state of the porridge, the monotony of family breakfast, or the injustice of being volunteered for yet another parish fundraiser. Friends in far-off counties respond with their own tales of woe. Unruly nephews, suspiciously eligible widowers, or the latest rumours about Lady Fletcher's mysterious health cure, which, based on the volume of imported gin, is definitely not herbal. Gossip, of course, is the true currency of correspondence. You have a network of informants rivaling any intelligence agency. Your school friend in London, the vicar's daughter in Cambridge, a cousin's wife who writes twice a week from the wilds of Wales. Through them, you hear everything worth hearing, and quite a bit that isn't. Engagements, broken hearts, scandalous dances, and who was spotted talking just a little too long at the Christmas bazaar. News spreads quickly, and by the time a tidbit reaches you, it has usually been embroidered, airbrushed, and spun into something faintly ridiculous. But these letters are more than entertainment. They are lifelines. They offer a way to feel connected to the world beyond your bedroom, to reassure yourself that you're not the only one surviving the daily onslaught of helpful family advice. There's a peculiar comfort in knowing that, somewhere out there, another unmarried woman is reading your words by candlelight and laughing until her tea grows cold. Sometimes, a letter is an act of rebellion, a shared confidence, a risque joke, or a frank account of your true feelings about the new curate's sideburns. Of course, you must be careful. Letters are, by nature, risky. They can fall into the wrong hands: your mother, a maid with an appetite for intrigue, or worse, a nosy younger brother who thinks Miss Penelope's private correspondence is an invitation to comedy. You develop a code, a system of nicknames and metaphors, so that only the truly initiated can decipher your meaning. A reference to the weather may, in fact, be a subtle critique of someone's marriage prospects. A mention of improving literature might mask the arrival of a scandalous French novel smuggled in the folds of an apron. Sometimes, the letters become your only confidants. When the rest of the house has gone quiet and the only sound is the ticking of the clock, you read through a bundle of old correspondence, yellowed, frayed at the edges, but alive with the voices of friends who remember when you were all young and everything seemed possible. You smile at old jokes, roll your eyes at past heartbreaks, and occasionally shed a tear for the girl who once wrote these words. Dreaming of a future that was always just out of reach, in a world where every action is scrutinized and every word weighed, your letters are your escape, your joy, and your secret source of strength. They remind you that, even if society keeps trying to shrink your world to a single room, your thoughts and your gossip will always travel farther. Unmarried women are society's go-to volunteers. Orphanages, soup kitchens, and endless church fundraisers are your battlefield. If you say no, expect passive-aggressive prayers for your soul. It all starts innocently enough, perhaps a gentle knock at your bedroom door, followed by the appearance of your mother or an enterprising aunt, clutching a list of worthy causes written in the cursive of obligation. They're desperate for extra hands at the bake sale, dear, you're told. And Mrs. Parsons has lost another treasurer. So we'll need you to keep the accounts for the widows' and orphans' tea. You soon realize this isn't a polite request. It's conscription by way of familial guilt and society's endless need to put unmarried women to good use. Charity work, in theory, is a noble calling. In practice, it's a marathon of tepid soup, crumbling ledgers, and organizing donations of clothes so ragged they'd barely qualify as scarecrow chic. Your natural talents, be they organization, needlework, or the uncanny ability to turn up on time, are pressed into service to support every good cause in a 10-mile radius. You master the art of appearing enthusiastic about raffling off pickled beets or hosting a reading circle for children who'd rather be anywhere else. There are endless committees, each with its own complex etiquette. If you're lucky, you're allowed to chair the acceptable entertainment subcommittee, a job that mostly involves vetoing Aunt Gertrude's annual suggestion to hire a performing parrot. Less fortunate, you'll be assigned to the church soup kitchen, where you ladle stew with a stoic smile, mentally ranking the parishioners based on their ability to feign gratitude. You're never alone in this battlefield. Every unmarried woman in town is pressed into charitable service, and there's a silent, ongoing competition for who can organize the most elaborate fundraising bazaar or outdo the others with a new form of embroidered bookmark. If you're especially unlucky, you may be drafted into organizing the annual jumble sale, an event that combines the logistical challenges of the Crimean War with the social hazards of second-hand bloomers. Refusing a charitable assignment is a social sin on par with stealing church candlesticks. The consequences are swift. Sideways glances at Sunday service, ominous whispers about your lack of Christian spirit, and the ever-present threat of being prayed for, pointedly and loudly, during the next meeting. Let us remember those who feel the burden of idleness. The vicar intones, eyes lingering on you just a beat too long. The message is clear. You will serve, or you will be served up as gossip. Of course, charity work does have its occasional perks. The annual orphanage fete means you can eat as much jam tart as you can stuff in your reticule. If you're creative, you can sneak away from tedious sewing circles and supervise the garden, which mostly means sitting in the shade and reading contraband novels under a respectable bonnet. There's also a peculiar camaraderie among your fellow spinsters, forged in the trenches of shared obligation and the art of strategic absence. You all know the real secret of Victorian philanthropy. The most important virtue is knowing when to look busy enough to avoid getting volunteered for next month's urgent emergency subcommittee. And yet, beneath the exasperation and the endless rounds of penny collections, there's an undeniable sense of accomplishment. You've kept the accounts balanced, comforted lost children, and raised enough funds to fix the leaky roof of Street Bartholomew's. Sure, no one will ever erect a statue in your honor, but you can take quiet pride in being the unseen engine behind your community's small mercies. At the end of another day of charitable hustle, you slip home with sore feet, ink-stained fingers, and a mind humming with new schemes for next month's fundraiser. You fall asleep to the soft clink of coins collected for a good cause, already dreaming up excuses for why you absolutely cannot coordinate the next cakewalk, because if Victorian society insists that unmarried women are born to serve, you might as well serve with wit, efficiency, and, when the vicar's not looking, a wink to the other women in the trenches. Everyone means well, which is Victorian, for I'm about to say something unintentionally devastating. You, perfect the polite smile and the art of changing the subject before someone offers you a cat. The moment you hit unmarried past a certain age, a new phase of social interaction opens up. It's called the pity parade, and your invitation is permanent. Suddenly, everyone you meet transforms into an amateur counselor with a fondness for sighs, loaded pauses, and the kind of head tilting normally reserved for small, injured birds. "You're looking well," they'll say, voice trembling with that blend of admiration and barely suppressed worry. "Have you been getting out? Seeing friends?" As if the walls of your bedroom might have grown teeth in the night and locked you in. And it's not just family. The postman, the greengrocer, even that one neighbor who communicates exclusively in cryptic garden metaphors. They all have an opinion about your singleness. Some attempt comfort, sharing the story of a great-aunt who didn't marry until she was 52, and she was perfectly happy, except for the ferrets. While others offer unsolicited advice, as if you simply hadn't thought to just say yes to any nice curate who comes along. Then there's the church crowd, experts in spiritual sympathy. They pray for your contentment in public, while privately sending you pamphlets about finding joy in solitude and signing you up for every committee in hopes you'll meet a recently widowed deacon. If you miss a week of services, you're liable to find a small army of concerned parishioners at your door, armed with scones and the latest news about eligible bachelors in distant counties. The real art is in handling the pity without becoming the pity. You quickly master the 3 essential responses: the polite smile, close-mouthed, serene, occasionally glazed; the gentle deflection, "How is your cousin's gout these days?" and, in emergencies, the sudden interest in any animal nearby. If all else fails, compliment someone's hat and let them talk about feathers for 20 minutes. But the most devastating pity comes from those who love you most. Mothers and aunts sigh as if their lungs have been rented for the season. "I only want to see you settled," your mother whispers, as though your life is an overboiling kettle. Your married sister offers you her youngest child for practice and gives you the look, half sympathy, half "please don't move back in." Even the family cat seems to sense you're in need of a companion, curling up at your feet with the air of someone volunteering for a lifelong emotional support role. Of course, sometimes the pity is less subtle. You'll be introduced at parties as "our dear Emily, who is such a help to everyone," which translates to, "Please, someone marry her before we have to embroider another set of tea towels." Others, convinced you must be tragic or bored, suggest new hobbies. Have you considered painting china? Or perhaps a brisk walk to the next village? No one ever asks if you're happy, because the answer might challenge the whole fragile Victorian worldview. If you have any backbone at all, you develop a sense of humor about it. When Aunt Mildred wonders aloud if you're lonely, you reply, "Only when the marmalade runs out." When your neighbor offers a second cat, you graciously decline, explaining you're holding out for a third. In the quiet of your room, you practice witty comebacks for every "you're so brave," and "I hope you don't mind always being the extra guest." Most of these retorts are best saved for letters to close friends, who will read them with a snort and pour you an imaginary glass of sherry. Eventually, you become something of a pity-handling expert. The sighs and meaningful glances bounce off your well-fortified exterior, leaving only the faintest smudge of self-doubt. You realize, with a quiet thrill, that the less you care, the more other people care for you. In a world obsessed with your supposed lack, you possess a quiet abundance, dignity, wit, and the very best collection of politely declined cats in the county. The unwed find each other, forming alliances stronger than any marriage contract. Together, you attend lectures, plot adventures, and invent new ways to ignore Aunt Margaret's matchmaking. It's a curious thing, Once you become a confirmed spinster, you gain access to a secret society, hidden in plain sight. At first, it's just the occasional shared smile across a crowded parlor, a mutual eye roll when the subject of prospects is raised, or a conspiratorial nod as you both slip away from the eligible bachelor's polka. But soon, you recognize the signs everywhere. The unmarried cousin who always volunteers for the library committee, the friend of a friend who prefers hiking to hymn singing, the distant relation who reads French novels with a slightly wicked grin. Before you know it, you're part of the unofficial League of Extraordinary Unmarrieds. Meetings happen wherever 2 or more spinsters are gathered, in drawing rooms, at charity sales, on park benches perfectly positioned for observing and judging local courtships. You exchange intelligence on the best second-hand bookshops, the location of every secret tea room within a 5-mile radius, and the most efficient routes to avoid running into well-meaning relatives. When Aunt Margaret corners one of you about the local curate, the rest swoop in like a flock of well-dressed crows, offering distractions, plausible alibis, or, in truly dire cases, a spontaneous discussion of the finer points of church architecture. Adventures are not only possible, but inevitable. You and your fellow spinsters plan day trips to the seaside. No chaperones, no suitors, just a picnic basket, and the delicious freedom of knowing nobody expects you to catch a cold, much less a husband. You organize group visits to museums, art exhibitions, or the most scandalous of all, public lectures about science and politics, where you gasp at the latest discoveries and debate world affairs with an enthusiasm your family insists is unbecoming. These friendships are, in their own way, more loyal and sustaining than any romantic engagement. Your friends become your chosen family, the ones who know when you need to vent about your mother's hints, or when you need someone to join you in laughing at the absurdity of another cousin's wedding menu. Together, you devise elaborate schemes for escaping dreadful social events, fake headaches, urgent embroidery emergencies, or last-minute calls from imaginary ailing aunts. You even develop a code, a flick of a fan, a raised eyebrow, a cough at precisely the right moment, to signal when it's time to make a strategic retreat from matchmaking conversations. Support comes in many forms. A well-timed compliment on a patched dress, the gift of a new book, a shared wink at the sight of 2 elderly bachelors squabbling over a fruitcake. When one of you has a particularly awful encounter with the pity circuit, the rest gather for tea and toast, delivering encouragement, sarcastic commentary, and sometimes just the silent comfort of company that doesn't require explanations. There's a power in these alliances, a subtle, quiet confidence that grows with every shared story and every day spent together outside the ordinary script. You discover you can be both unmarried and completely indispensable. As the years go on, your circle expands to include aunts, widows, governesses, and the occasional bold widow who announces, with a grin, that she's retired from matrimony. Together, you share secrets, plot escapes, and sometimes, late at night, wonder aloud what all the fuss over marriage was ever about. In the end, these friendships become your anchor and your adventure. You have created your own community, a society with its own rules, its own joys, and its own way of loving fiercely. If quietly, the world may keep trying to label you as less, but the League of Extraordinary Unmarrieds knows the truth. Together, you're more than enough. And when all else fails, you can always count on your friends to help you dodge Aunt Margaret and finish the lemon cake before anyone else has a chance. Victorian doctors have 2 solutions for unmarried women: rest and try getting married. You become intimately familiar with smelling salts, laudanum, and the phrase female complaints. For the unmarried woman, A simple cough or a touch of fatigue can quickly spiral into a full-blown family crisis, or at least a lengthy consultation with the local physician, who, like most Victorian medical men, specializes in two things: grave pronouncements and vague solutions. Anything from headaches to ennui to the unmistakable desire to avoid another church bazaar is diagnosed as a symptom of your condition. This condition, of course, being unmarried and therefore in need of constant supervision, fresh air, and possibly a stern talk with the curate. The experience begins with a visit from Dr. Arbuthnot, who arrives at your bedside armed with a stethoscope, a bushy moustache, and absolutely no curiosity about your actual health. "You're looking pale, miss," he declares after 3 minutes of squinting at your fingernails. "Have you been resting? Have you considered marriage?" It does wonders for the nerves. You assure him you are resting, perhaps more than you'd like, and that your nerves are as calm as anyone's could be with 3 aunts living under the same roof. Treatment options for the Victorian spinster are a veritable smorgasbord of questionable potions and psychological warfare. Smelling salts are the first line of defense, presented in dainty vials and waved under your nose whenever you look even remotely weary, bored, or overexposed to the color beige. These tiny bottles are practically a fashion accessory, clipped to your chatelaine and offered at every fainting spell, real or imagined. If your symptoms persist, the family doctor prescribes laudanum, a tincture of opium in a lovely glass bottle, guaranteed to put an end to your complaints by making you far too sleepy to have any. Laudanum is the answer to headaches, heartaches, and, occasionally, existential crises caused by endless afternoons of mending socks. Dosage instructions are vague. Take as needed, but not so much as to become interesting. Should you suffer from something more tangible, say, a sprained ankle from trying to outrun Aunt Margaret's matchmaking efforts, medical advice consists of rest, cold compresses, and another gentle suggestion that you find a husband. Married women are sturdier, Dr. Arbuthnot explains, nodding as if this is an established scientific fact. Briefly wonder if you should propose to the next man who walks past the garden gate, just to see if your ankle miraculously heals. Then there are the female complaints, an umbrella term that covers everything from stomachaches to anything deemed too embarrassing for polite society. For these, the prescription is usually a mysterious tonic, bed rest in a darkened room, and a stern warning not to exert yourself, except, of course, in charitable works, piano recitals, or walking briskly to the apothecary. If you are especially unfortunate, someone in the family will recommend a visit to the seaside for your health. A thinly disguised effort to exile you somewhere you can't disrupt the household routine with your troublesome single existence. For the emotional maladies, restlessness, sadness, or the occasional burst of independent thought, the solution is even simpler. Distraction. Relatives prescribe embroidery, light reading, preferably sermons, and frequent tea. If these don't work, you may be sent to visit a distant cousin for a change of air, which is code for until you stop being so inconveniently morose. Through all this, you develop a sense of humor and a healthy skepticism of Victorian medicine. You learn that female complaints are often just the natural byproduct of living in a world where your worth is measured in suitors and your voice is treated as a minor disturbance. You become adept at dosing yourself with just enough laudanum to nap through tedious afternoons, and you keep your smelling salts at the ready for any sudden encounters with distant relatives or unexpected proposals. In the end, you realize the only real cure for being an unmarried woman in the Victorian era is patience, and the company of other spinster friends with whom you can share laughter, sympathy, and perhaps, in moments of rebellion, a secret glass of port. Dinner is a group performance where your main role is to answer anything new with a convincing no. Every cousin's engagement is dissected like a frog in a science class. As the sun sets and the family gathers in the formal dining room, the evening meal commences. A ritual as precise and choreographed as any ballet, but with more gravy and barely suppressed tension. You, as the unmarried woman of the household, are positioned somewhere between the salt cellar and the line of family expectation, sandwiched awkwardly between a married sister and an uncle who never quite learned to chew with his mouth closed. There's always an extra place setting for surprise guests, though deep down everyone hopes it will be a suitor for you. Conversation flows, if you can call it that, across the table like weak tea. The married siblings provide the main entertainment, recounting stories of children's latest illnesses and husbands' promotion prospects. Your own contributions are meant to be small and unobtrusive, like parsley garnish or the celery nobody actually eats. You answer, nothing new. So often you begin to feel like a human echo. No matter how many books you've read, cakes you've baked, or acts of invisible charity you've performed, none of it holds a candle to Cousin Matilda's recent engagement, which will be discussed with forensic scrutiny for the next 3 months. Every topic, no matter how innocent, is eventually weaponized into a subtle inquisition. Has anyone heard from Mr. Weston, the eligible neighbor? How is the new curate settling in, and did you notice if he lingered by the dessert table at last Sunday's tea? Every mention of a single man within a 20-mile radius is met with a volley of sidelong glances in your direction, as if hoping you'll leap up and declare your intention to propose on the spot. Occasionally, your mother will interject with, "You did speak with Lord Chudley at the library, didn't you?" As if sharing shelf space with a baron is tantamount to being halfway down the aisle. The food itself becomes part of the theatre. There are endless side dishes, overboiled carrots, mysterious puddings, potatoes that could double as doorstops, and you learn to hide your amusement at the sheer variety of ways a parsnip can be ruined. If you're especially unlucky, a particularly hopeful aunt will attempt to pass you the engagement chicken, a dish rumoured to bring suitors flocking, though all it's ever brought you is indigestion and awkward conversation. Dinner is also when the family takes stock of its assets, namely, the marriageability of its younger members. Cousin Beatrice's new fiancé is dissected with the precision of a taxidermist. His income, lineage, and moral fortitude inspected down to the smallest detail. Meanwhile, you sip your soup and offer neutral commentary, acutely aware that you're next on the autopsy table. "What about you, dear?" someone inevitably asks. "No interesting acquaintances?" You smile, shake your head, and attempt to divert attention to the state of the weather, the price of coal, or the novelty of the new pudding. You become adept at conversational sleight of hand, redirecting, downplaying, occasionally faking a coughing fit if conversation turns too pointed. When someone tries to draw you into a debate about the modern woman, you politely excuse yourself to help with the pudding, knowing full well that the kitchen is a sanctuary from both social scrutiny and the family's obsession with nuptial news. When the meal finally ends, and the men retire to the drawing room to debate politics, while the women cluster in corners to trade recipes and rumours, you slip quietly away. In the solitude of your room, you replay the evening's events and marvel at your own performance. Another dinner survived, another night with your dignity intact and your singleness undisturbed. You may be invisible at the family table, but you're an expert at navigating the treacherous waters of Victorian dinner conversation. And really, what could be more satisfying than escaping with both your sanity and the last of the lemon tart? With the house quiet, you escape into books. Maybe you're reading Jane Eyre for the 12th time, or sneaking radical pamphlets under your mattress. Either way, it's the safest rebellion you'll stage all year. As the last dish is washed and the household settles into its evening routines, you retreat to the gentle solitude of your bedroom, your very own fortress of solitude, lined with dusty shelves and dimly lit oil lamps. In the hushed aftermath of another day of Victorian expectations, you indulge in the one luxury no one can quite take from you, reading after dark. You begin with the classics, of course. No home is complete without a stack of improving literature, books of moral instruction, and the occasional volume of poetry to keep up appearances. These sit in plain sight, ready for family inspection and the prying eyes of the occasional houseguest. You can always be caught with a book of sermons open on your lap, gently nodding as if considering your own salvation, while actually planning your next literary heist. But when the house is truly still, you reach for your hidden treasures. Perhaps it's a beloved, dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre, the binding loose from years of secret rereadings and hopeful underlining. Maybe it's a novel by the Bronte sisters, smuggled into the house in a brown paper wrapper. Or, if you're feeling especially daring, a collection of modern essays by a writer who has never even set foot in a drawing room. Reading at night is more than just a pastime. It's a quiet act of defiance. Victorian society insists you fill your evenings with needwork, letter writing, and the endless, thankless tasks of charitable obligation. But here, alone by candlelight, you can let your imagination roam far beyond the boundaries of your own narrow world. You devour stories of women who choose adventure over propriety, who fall in love with the wrong people, or who, scandal of scandals, choose not to marry at all. Sometimes you push the limits even further. Radical pamphlets, borrowed from a friend or pilfered from a cousin's bookshelf, find their way under your mattress. These slim, seditious volumes whisper of women's rights, the vote, and a world in which a woman might actually choose her own destiny. Reading these by lamplight feels a bit like conjuring magic, or at least mischief. You imagine yourself in the role of a political firebrand, boldly speaking your mind in a hall full of astonished men, only to remember with a smile that your most recent public speech was at the church cake sale. The risks are real, of course. Should anyone discover your nighttime reading habits, especially anything more controversial than a collection of psalms, you'd be treated to a round of family interventions, advice from concerned aunts, and perhaps even a special visit from the vicar with a new list of improving books. But the danger only adds to the thrill. After all, what is a spinster's life without a little well-earned subversion? Every night, as you turn each forbidden page, you build a secret self, someone smarter, braver, and wittier than anyone suspects. The heroines in your stories become your allies, their triumphs and heartbreaks mapped onto your own hopes and fears. You memorize favorite lines to quote later, under your breath, as you walk through the garden, or sit at another endless family dinner. And so you read, night after night. As the clock ticks quietly and the world outside fades into darkness, these quiet hours spent with books are your true education, your escape, and your softest rebellion. By morning, you'll tuck your secrets away, replace the dust jacket, and present yourself as the dutiful daughter or sister once more. But for now, with the fire guttering low and your mind alight, you are more than just unmarried. You are curious, courageous, and, if anyone asks, simply reading for the pleasure of it. Let them believe what they will. Your heart belongs to the stories that keep you awake long after the rest of the world has gone to sleep. Christmas, Easter, any excuse for a gathering is also an opportunity for relatives to count your rings and comment on your prospects. Your gifts are always practical. So are the reminders of your singleness. Holidays in a Victorian household are a glittering swirl of roast meats, plum pudding, and traditions older than the wallpaper. The halls are decked with holly. The air is thick with the scent of pine and boiled cabbage. and every available surface is colonized by some combination of family, neighbors, and distant cousins who only materialize when there's a chance of free trifle. For most, these are days of joy, togetherness, and raucous family games. For you, the unmarried woman, it's also open season for subtle interrogations and the annual Olympics of polite endurance. Festivities begin the moment you step into the parlor, cheeks rosy from the cold and arms full of practical gifts, woolen stockings, sewing kits, and, if someone's feeling especially generous, a new bottle of cough elixir, because nothing says festive like a stern reminder to stay healthy so you can keep minding everyone else's children. Your younger cousins squeal over toy soldiers and porcelain dolls. The recently married are showered with crystal, silver spoons and congratulatory toasts. You get a sturdy umbrella for all your errands, as if your greatest adventure is a solo trek to the greengrocer in the rain. The great holiday meal is a spectacle. You find yourself at the far end of the table, strategically placed between a widowed aunt and the family dog. Platters of goose and bowls of punch circle past. But the real feast is in conversation. Every marriage, engagement, and baby is recounted with gusto, the whole family weighing in on who's eligible, who's hopeless, and who must surely be next. You laugh at the right moments, pour gravy for your neighbor, and duck the inevitable question. And have you anyone special to share the holidays with, dear? Your answer is as seasoned as the stuffing. Only the pleasure of your company, Aunt Edith. Games and amusements offer little reprieve. There's charades, in which you are always cast as spinster aunt, and musical chairs, which takes on a new irony when you realize you're never the last one sitting. Even the annual snowball fight comes with its own brand of humiliation. Dodging well-meaning relatives who urge you to find a nice young man to help you up from the snow. You become an expert at slipping away to help the cook or entertain the children, where questions are limited to, "Why don't you have a husband?" and "Can you make the pudding dance?" Decorations are another reminder of your unmarried status. Married daughters hang up stockings in matching pairs. Your stocking is a solo act, hung by the fire like a polite apology for not multiplying. Mistletoe, normally an emblem of romance, becomes a strategic hazard, too long beneath it, and someone will try to engineer a meeting between you and a bachelor uncle with digestive issues. Even the presents you give are scrutinized. Hand-embroidered handkerchiefs are praised as practical. Translation: didn't cost much, did it? And your carefully chosen books are returned with polite thanks, and a promise to read them when the children stop needing so much attention. Your only hope for glory is the annual fruit-cake bake-off. And even then, victory is bittersweet, especially when the judge remarks, "You must have so much free time to perfect your baking, dear." Still, amidst the awkwardness and the not-so-subtle hints, there are moments of genuine comfort. You find your fellow spinsters by the fire, sharing a sly smile and the best brandy. You make the younger cousins laugh, slip out for a moonlit walk, or rescue the dog from the worst of the holiday outfits. At the end of the evening, when the house quiets and you're left with your practical gifts and another tally of your prospects, you realize you've survived another holiday, unmarried, unruffled, and, in your own way, irreplaceable. And if all else fails, you can always toast yourself. Here's to the unmatched sock, the spare umbrella, and the singular skill of making it through Christmas dinner without once threatening to elope with the chimney sweep. Dogs, cats, and an impressive collection of ferns become your confidantes. They listen without judgment and never ask why you're still single. In a house teeming with relatives who never miss a chance to inquire about your prospects, pets and plants are refreshingly silent. They don't care if you wear the same dress twice in a week. and not once have they suggested you keep an open mind about the new curate. Your animal friends and greenery become a parallel family, one that demands little and gives much, flourishing in the quiet corners of your unmarried life. It begins with a kitten rescued from a rain barrel or a small dog left behind by a traveling cousin. Soon, they multiply. One finds you on a foggy morning walk. Another is pressed into your arms by a well-meaning neighbor who just knows you have the time. Victorian pets may not sleep in your bed, at least, not officially, but everyone knows that the spinster's room is the warmest, safest place for a half-grown cat or an elderly spaniel. These creatures are experts at finding sunny spots, curling up in your lap as you read, and greeting you at the door with unreserved enthusiasm, something you rarely get from your second cousin, Harriet. The bond is deeper than convenience. Dogs become steadfast guardians, always happy to chase away an over-eager suitor or signal when an unwanted visitor is approaching. Cats, meanwhile, are the perfect co-conspirators. Silent, aloof, and naturally suspicious of anyone who asks too many personal questions. They sit on your desk while you write letters, batting at your quill and occasionally contributing a paw-print signature to your correspondence. And then there are the plants. Houseplants are the Victorian spinster's socially acceptable obsession, a hobby that signals both gentility and an eye for beauty. Your collection starts with a single fern, but soon your windowsills are a jungle of potted geraniums, ivy, and the occasional experimental orchid. You talk to your plants as you water them, confiding your hopes, frustrations, and the latest dinner table indignity. They respond with silent, persistent growth, unfurling new leaves as if to cheer you on in your quiet rebellion. Gardening is an especially soothing pursuit. You spend hours in the conservatory or out in the kitchen garden, tending to roses, weeding herb beds, and cultivating flowers that, much like yourself, are overlooked by those in too much of a hurry. Here, you are in control. If you want to grow bluebells in November or attempt a lemon tree, no one can stop you. Your successes are celebrated with the cat, your failures blamed on the dog, and your finest blooms are proudly displayed in the parlor, much to the chagrin of anyone who dislikes the smell of greenery indoors. Pets and plants are more than distractions. They're companions for life's small adventures. You share your morning walks with a dog who never gossips about your destination, and you confide your secret ambitions to a row of geraniums that have never told a soul. You teach the cat to fetch a ribbon, try and fail to train the papa, dog to balance a biscuit, and laugh aloud at the spectacle of both animals plotting to sneak roast beef from the kitchen. Of course, not everyone understands your devotion. There are whispers that women with too many pets are compensating for something, and the local children are convinced you can talk to animals, or possibly that you're a witch. Let them whisper. Your animal and botanical companions are more loyal, loving, and accepting than half the eligible bachelors in the county. In a world obsessed with matchmaking and appearances, you've cultivated your own kind of happiness. With every wag, purr, and new green shoot, you're reminded that companionship comes in many forms, and some of the best never ask questions about your future. Instead, they sit quietly at your side, breathing, blooming, and making even the most ordinary day feel just a little bit extraordinary. If you take work as a governess, you're neither family nor servant, just eternally in between. It's a strange existence, full of rules, loneliness, and the quiet satisfaction of teaching someone else's children Latin curse words. Picture it, a stately Victorian home, all gables and respectable gloom, with an extra attic room for the governess, the human buffer wedged between the drawing room's embroidered cushions and the scullery's dishwater. As a governess, you gain the remarkable privilege of both being gainfully employed and yet belonging nowhere at all. You're greeted with polite indifference at breakfast. "Oh yes, Miss Smith, would you pass the toast?" And at dinner, you dine alone, because heaven forbid your presence should dampen the household's enthusiasm for roast mutton and marital gossip. Your charges, the children, are your kingdom. You teach them sums, elocution, penmanship, and, if you're feeling subversive, a few phrases in Latin that are technically appropriate but likely to raise eyebrows at Sunday dinner. The children love you in the complicated, transactional way children love anyone who might accidentally help them get out of spelling homework. They confide secrets, bring you wilted flowers, and occasionally ally with you against the greater evil of Aunt Beatrice's piano recitals. But your authority only goes so far. In the pecking order of the Victorian household, the governess is like Schrodinger's cat, both present and absent, watched by everyone, trusted by no one. You have more education than half the family, but your salary is doled out by a matriarch who refers to you as the help whenever guests visit. The servants, meanwhile, regard you with wary camaraderie, unsure whether to invite you for tea or avoid you in case you tattle about the missing silverware. Free time is an uncertain luxury. You may be allowed the use of the library, so long as you leave the good volumes untouched or a walk in the garden, provided you stick to the paths and don't scandalize the neighbors by appearing too content. Letters home are carefully worded, emphasizing gratitude and the joy of contributing to the next generation, even as you privately wonder if you'll ever escape the endless supply of lukewarm tea and awkward silences. Your wardrobe walks a similar tightrope, too drab, and the family frets that you'll embarrass them at church. Too stylish, and you risk being mistaken for a rival by the lady of the house. Your dresses become a study in careful neutrality, muted colors, sturdy fabrics, and just enough lace to say respectable, but not so much as to suggest you might be having fun. Despite the isolation, there are moments of quiet rebellion and absurd triumph. Maybe you introduce your pupils to the works of Mary Wollstonecraft or let them read Shakespeare's racier sonnets when no one's looking. You swap knowing glances with the other spinsters in town, trade recipes with the housekeeper, and learn which family skeletons rattle loudest after a second glass of sherry. Sometimes, on your solitary evening walks, you imagine yourself as the heroine of a novel, resourceful, resilient, and ready to seize her destiny once she's marked everyone's Latin homework. Of course, there's always the possibility of being let go at a moment's notice. A new baby, a sudden inheritance, or a passing whim can all mean the end of your post. You keep your trunks half-packed, letters of reference at the ready, and dreams of something, anything, more than a life spent correcting spelling mistakes and settling sibling disputes. Yet, for all the rules and rigid boundaries, being a governess means a peculiar kind of freedom. You answer to no husband, owe your livelihood to your own skills, and know the satisfaction of having made a difference, however small, in the lives of children who may one day recall Miss Smith as the only adult who ever taught them something worth knowing. It's a lonely life, but it's yours. Half invisible, slightly absurd, and just independent enough to keep you hoping for something better, even as you decline your 6th cup of weak tea for the week. As the years roll on, unmarried status slowly becomes its own form of power. Suddenly, you're an aunt, respected, feared, and in charge of the family's secret stash of sherry. It's a strange alchemy, this transformation from unmarried daughter to formidable aunt. In your youth, you were the object of pity, speculation, and the occasional charitable matchmaking attempt. But time has a way of turning the tables. Sometimes gently, sometimes with the subtlety of a well-aimed sherry decanter. The world of the Victorian unmarried woman is not a straight line toward irrelevance, but a slow, steady climb toward a peak known only to those who have outlasted everyone's expectations. As you reach middle age, a curious thing happens. People begin to defer to you, often without quite realizing it. You acquire a sort of mythic status, especially if you've managed to avoid scandal and perfect the art of saying little but observing everything. Nieces and nephews, once encouraged to avoid catching your spinster affliction, now line up for your advice on matters as varied as grammar, love, and how to handle a stubborn parlor fern. Your unmarried status is no longer a family shame, but a source of peculiar pride. After all, you've survived not just the matchmaking years, but the endless onslaught of expectations and the annual "will she ever marry" sweepstakes. You are, by degrees, given new responsibilities. The care of family traditions falls into your lap. Whether it's the secret recipe for lemon syllabub or the intricate rituals of Christmas pudding, you become the keeper of family lore, the guardian of old letters and even older grudges. You're asked to settle disputes with a well-timed glare or a decisive "I think we'll do it my way." And your opinion suddenly weighs more than all the married aunts combined, especially after your second glass of sherry. In the world of inheritance and family business, your independence is now an asset. With no husband to complicate matters and no children to favor, you're viewed as impartial, or, at the very least, as the safest pair of hands for the silver cutlery. You manage household accounts with the brisk efficiency of a general, and the younger generation comes to you for loans, letters of introduction, and, occasionally, for rescue from disastrous courtships. Sometimes, you wield your power for good, securing scholarships, championing a niece's education, or protecting the family's least popular parrot from an untimely demise. Socially, you ascend to the rarefied realm of aunt, the one who gives the best presents, tells the juiciest stories, and dispenses advice as if it were medicinal port. You can get away with eccentricities, odd hats, outlandish opinions, the occasional pointed remark about the local vicar's shortcomings. Your presence at gatherings is both expected and slightly feared. Everyone knows that, if you choose, you can turn the tide of a conversation, expose a family secret, or diffuse a quarrel with nothing more than an arched eyebrow and a measured sip of fortified wine. Of course, there are drawbacks. Middle age does not magically exempt you from loneliness or the creeping suspicion that life is passing by outside the drawing room window. There are moments, often late at night, after the fire has burned low, when you wonder if you've traded too much for respectability. But those moments are balanced by a quiet satisfaction in knowing that, against the odds, you have carved out a place for yourself. You are not just unmarried. You are independent, influential, and, at long last, able to choose when to lend your wisdom, your time, and, most importantly, your sherry. As the world changes around you and younger women face their own rounds of matchmaking and judgment, you offer them not just advice, but a living example of what can be built out of spinsterhood. A life full of dignity, subtle power, and, when the situation calls for it, a dash of perfectly timed mischief. No pension, no husband's estate, just the hope of outliving your enemies, or being remembered fondly enough to score a spot in someone's guest room. As the years pass, and the bustle of family life begins to fade into the background hum of ticking clocks and ever-dwindling dinner invitations, the reality of an unmarried woman's future looms quietly at the edge of every conversation. Unlike your married siblings, secure in the knowledge that their twilight years will be spent presiding over a bustling household, a half-dozen grandchildren, and the mysterious family silver, you face the great Victorian, unknown, with little more than a sensible shawl and a stubborn sense of humor. Retirement, for the single woman, is not a phase, but a gradual, often unplanned slide into gentle eccentricity. There are no pensions for former spinsters, and few financial safety nets beyond what you can squirrel away in teapots, behind loose bricks, or under your extensive collection of faded needlework. If you were lucky enough to inherit a little money or earn some as a governess, companion, or charitable committee's arena, you stretch every shilling with the skill of a veteran quartermaster. Thrift becomes second nature. Every mended stocking, every carefully repurposed hat, is a small victory over economic uncertainty. With no estate to anchor your future and no children to quarrel over your armchair, the dream is to become the beloved fixture, the aunt or godmother whom every family member hopes to claim for Christmas and whose stories are just the right blend of sharp wit and nostalgia. The highest honor? To be spoken of as such good company that no one can quite remember whose guest room is actually yours. But there's always the spectre of dependency, lurking in the wings like an understudy for tragedy. You plan, as best you can, for the day when stairs become mountains and a leaking roof becomes a mortal foe. Some spinster friends make pacts, promising to share rooms, resources, and a lifetime supply of cats in their final years, a cheerful rebellion against a system that never quite got around to providing for women with more brains than prospects. Others rely on the kindness of relatives, hoping their years of unpaid child minding, charity work, and secret birthday cake baking have earned them a permanent invitation to the family table. Health is another concern, and Victorian medicine has precious little to offer the unmarried. If you fall ill, the best you can hope for is a niece with a patient disposition and a steady hand for pouring laudanum. You develop your own quiet routines for staying healthy. Brisk walks when no one's looking, sturdy boots for winter, and a steady supply of herbal tea, whether or not you believe it does anything but keep your hands warm. For some, the later years bring unexpected freedom. With marriage no longer an option, and, let's be honest, no longer a threat. You can embrace your oddest habits without apology. Maybe you take up beekeeping, write your memoirs, or finally start painting all the furniture in outlandish colors. You become the neighborhood's unofficial historian, the dispenser of peppermint drops and improbable advice, and the local authority on whether or not the church roof is leaking again. Still, every unmarried woman is haunted by one question: who will remember me? Victorian society prizes legacy and lineage above all. But you know that a life well lived is measured not by the size of your monument, but by the number of people who sigh fondly at the mention of your name, who keep your letters, and who remember your recipes long after the details of your situation have faded. And if, at the end of all things, your final address is a cozy guest room, with a window overlooking someone else's rose garden, well, that's not the worst fate imaginable. After all, you've already survived the perils of matchmaking, the dinner table interrogations, and a lifetime of unsolicited advice. Facing the future alone is just one more adventure, and you're more prepared than most, armed with stories, stubbornness, and just enough sherry to toast whatever comes next. When all's said and done, your legacy is tallied in family stories, a few battered portraits, and the cryptic notes in your will about who gets your teapot collection. For the Victorian unmarried woman, death is less of a distant dread and more of a final bureaucratic performance. A last, grand act in which you finally get to control the narrative, at least for a little while. It begins with the practical matters. Having lived a life of making do, stretching coins, and navigating family politics, you know the importance of leaving things in order. And so, in a battered desk drawer, beneath stacks of carefully folded letters and half-completed samplers, lies your will, an unimposing but powerful document, written in a careful hand and occasionally annotated with biting commentary only your closest friends will understand. The process of estate planning is Victorian theatre at its best. Solicitors visit, notepads in hand, prepared for drama. Nieces and nephews tiptoe around, suddenly more attentive, as though one too many missed tea visits might see their name crossed off the list in favor of a distant cousin with better manners. You relish the moment, crafting bequests with a level of irony you never dared display at the dinner table. To my beloved nephew Arthur, my prized collection of ferns, in the hope he finally learns to keep something alive. To dearest cousin Eliza, who never once remembered my birthday, the dusty umbrella, stand from the attic, with all due affection. The more cryptic the notes, the greater the posthumous confusion, and the more satisfying your secret revenge. Beyond the paperwork, though, is the greater question. How will you be remembered? In a world obsessed with weddings and lineage, what does a spinster leave behind? Your legacy is pieced together in fragments, an oil painting, half-faded and fiercely unsmiling, a battered set of poetry books, filled with marginalia and the occasional shopping list, and, above all, family stories. Most are affectionate, if a bit muddled by time. She was a little eccentric but clever. She baked the best seed cake in 3 counties. She always had a kind word for the children, but never let anyone cheat cards. There is a certain freedom in knowing that, with no direct heirs, you can orchestrate your posthumous reputation with abandon. You might leave secret notes tucked into recipe books or marginalia in the family Bible. This verse is the best, and yes, I did see Mrs. Parker steal the gooseberries in 1867. You may leave sentimental trinkets to favorite nieces or old friends, a locket, a pressed flower, or the well-worn copy of Jane Eyre you read every winter for 20 years. Of course, no Victorian death would be complete without a funeral, equal parts somber ritual and social event. Relatives gather, trading hushed stories and speculative whispers. Did she really travel to Bath with that poet? I heard she turned down 3 proposals. Some are genuinely mournful, others simply intrigued by the possibility of inheriting a tea service or that much-rumoured stash of sovereigns in the parlour clock. The service is a procession of respectful eulogies, so devoted to others, and covert glances at the will's executor. Flowers are laid, hymns are sung, and someone, inevitably, makes a poignant toast to life well lived, if not well married. The best you can hope for is that, in the retelling, your oddities grow more charming and your single-mindedness becomes a kind of legendary wisdom. In the end, your influence lingers in the small rituals of daily life. A niece bakes your recipe for gingerbread. A nephew takes up your habit of reading in the garden, and a grandchild, barely old enough to remember your name, inherits your love of midnight snacks and stubbornness. The world, so obsessed with marital status, is forced to admit you left your mark not in sons and daughters, but in the stories, laughter, and quiet courage that ripple through the generations. And if, somewhere out there, a future spinster finds one of your cryptic notes tucked between the pages of a dull devotional, she'll know you lived fiercely, died on your own terms, and left just enough mystery behind to keep them guessing for years to come. For all its miseries, spinsterhood in Victorian England sometimes meant freedom. Freedom to think, to create, to exist without anyone's permission, and in a world obsessed with marriage. Sometimes the greatest rebellion is to just stay single and enjoy the absurdity of it all. Let's be honest. Much of the Victorian spinster's life was coloured by a palette of grey skies, grey morals, and the palette, faintly grey tea, offered at every social function. But woven through all that grey was a vibrant thread of liberty, quiet pleasure, and a stubborn joy that managed to escape the notice of the most eagle-eyed aunt. After all, when society has all but given up on you, you're free to do things your own way, provided you don't make too much noise about it. First, there's the freedom of thought. While your married contemporaries are often buried under an avalanche of household ledgers, babies, and the endless search for a reliable cook, you have time to explore the world inside your head. You read voraciously, everything from novels to travelogues to the odd scientific treatise, safe in the knowledge that no one will quiz you on dinner menus or expect you to recite the household inventory by heart. You ponder radical ideas by lamplight and scribble secret opinions in the margins of borrowed books, never needing to apologize for your curiosity. Creativity flourishes in unexpected ways, with no one supervising your hobbies or questioning your use of time. You become a dabbler, a tinkerer, an inventor of your own entertainment. You paint, with or without talent, write letters that double as comedic monologues, compose poetry, and experiment in the kitchen, sometimes with alarming results. If your attempts at lemon cake come out closer to lemon brick, so what? No one will send it back, and the dog has yet to lodge a formal complaint. You try, you fail, you try again, and in the privacy of your own company, failure loses its sting and becomes simply another story to tell your fellow spinsters. And then there's friendship, perhaps the most undervalued treasure of unmarried life. Freed from the constant churning of matchmaking and marital duties, you are able to cultivate deep and lasting connections with other women who know the weight and the weightlessness of spinsterhood. Together, you form a secret society of wit and solidarity, trading books, recipes, advice, and the occasional clandestine glass of sherry. These friendships are your safety net, your audience, and sometimes your only escape from the ceaseless scrutiny of the parlor. Low expectations, as it turns out, can be fabulously liberating. No one expects you to host the grandest parties or outshine the latest bride. You are free to linger in libraries, take long walks, or nap in the afternoon sun with a book across your face. On a bad day, your only obligation is to avoid the family dinner conversation about eligible bachelors. On a good day, you get to say no to every invitation, every suitor, every thinly veiled request to just give him a chance. What a relief, in a world so determined to shape your life for you, to be able to decline with a smile and slip away to your favorite armchair, your favorite book, your favorite quiet thought. Sometimes, if you're lucky, the world forgets you altogether, leaving you free to listen to your own mind, chart your own course, and make your own rules. No dowries, no babies, no husbands, just you, your friends, your ambitions, and your afternoon tea. In the end, it's not so much that spinsterhood is a fate to be feared, but an opportunity to be seized, a chance to live, to laugh, and to claim a little corner of absurd, delicious independence. So yes, there were miseries. Yes, there was loneliness. But for every hardship, there was a measure of freedom, an unclaimed slice of cake, an empty guest room, a future no one could write but you. And really, isn't that the sweetest rebellion of all? Somewhere between the third cup and the fourth existential sigh, disaster strikes. The tea caddy is empty. As an unmarried Victorian woman, tea is your social life, therapy, and one legitimate excuse for sitting down in the afternoon. The ensuing crisis is only rivaled by that time you dropped your only hairpin down the privy. Tea isn't just a drink. In the Victorian unmarried household, it's a ritual, a performance, a pause between you really must try harder to marry. And would you mind organizing the church bazaar again? The sound of the kettle boiling is a kind of emotional Morse code, signaling relief from the relentless expectations and a safe haven from family discussions about your future. It's the one time of day when you can be certain no one will bother you, except, of course, when you run out. There's a rhythm to the daily tea, the gentle clatter of cups, the measured precision of pouring, the careful selection of a biscuit that will, with luck, hold together just long enough to dunk. You can almost forget your status as the family's unclaimed asset, lost among the matched pairs and marital ambition. Tea time is the hour when fellow spinsters gather, the great equalizer. Whether you're a faded gentlewoman or a fiery bluestocking, all grievances dissolve in hot, slightly oversteeped comfort. And so, when the tea caddy's last leaves rattle in the bottom, it's a genuine catastrophe. You stare, frozen, at the empty tin. A creeping horror rises, along with the realization that you will now have to make do with weak substitutes, perhaps some bitter pennyroyal, or the vague, suspicious herbal concoction recommended by an aunt who claims she once met Florence Nightingale. There is no dignity in chamomile. Coffee is only for breakfast, and water, well, you wouldn't want the neighbors thinking you've completely given up. You survey your options. There's the faint hope that someone has hidden a spare stash behind the flower jar. Your search reveals only dust and last Christmas's candied peel. You could try to borrow some from a neighbor, but the risk is high. The transaction will be noted, commented upon, and undoubtedly shared with the next relative who comes to call. I hear you were short of tea, dear. How distressing. The possibility of scandal over a borrowed cup is almost as bad as being seen buying your own at the grocer's. After all, why doesn't she have a husband to provide for these emergencies? As panic simmers, the house begins to sense the change in atmosphere. The cat looks up, concerned. A dog whimpers by the door. Fellow unmarried friends gather around, each checking her own reserves with the seriousness of naval officers preparing for siege. It's a moment of shared adversity. You swap stories of past shortages, heroic tales of aunties who braved snow and mud for an extra ounce, and bold, reckless ideas about growing your own tea, which, given the English climate, is an exercise in delusion. Deprived of your usual ritual, the afternoon stretches, aimless and brittle. Tasks that once felt manageable, darning, letter writing, plotting subtle revenge on the curate, suddenly seem insurmountable. The lack of tea becomes the lack of everything. Comfort, ceremony, the invisible glue holding the day together. You try to rally with lemonade, but it isn't the same. Even the family ferns look droopier. But, as ever, spinsters are nothing if not resourceful. You gather the remnants of old tins, cobble together a blend that is more optimism than leaf, and invite your closest friends to share in the experiment. The brew is muddy, the biscuits stale, but the laughter is real. In the absence of tea, you discover something almost as sustaining: companionship, resilience, and the simple joy of making do together. And the next time the caddy is full, you'll appreciate it all the more. Because, for the unmarried woman of Victorian England, surviving a tea crisis is proof that you can survive anything, even the privy, even the endless, unanswerable question: will you be joining us for tea? Absolutely, provided there's any left. Every year brings the endless social marathon known as the season. You attend garden parties, balls, and picnics, armed with your best gloves and lowest expectations. Unmarried, you become background scenery, perfect for blending in, eavesdropping, or rescuing awkward bachelors from their own mothers. From the first sprigs of lilac to the last limp bunting on the village green, the season descends upon Victorian society with the force of a particularly determined flock of aunts. Invitations arrive in stacks. The family calendar is soon a minefield of must-attend events, and every shop window gleams with the promise of new ribbons, gloves, and the latest in anti-perspiration powders. For the unmarried woman, however, this whirlwind of activity is less about romance and more about performance art, smiling, spinning, and pretending not to hear the phrase, "such a shame, really," whispered just behind your back. Preparation begins weeks in advance. You consult your wardrobe with the seriousness of a field general, repairing hems, relacing stays, and choosing the one dress that's still almost fashionable. Aunts swarm around you, dabbing rosewater behind your ears and offering opinions on hair arrangements. Try to look hopeful, dear, they advise, as if an optimistic bun might lure a stray baronet into proposing before the second waltz. At the first garden party, you slip in between flower beds and small talk, artfully dodging the parade of eligible bachelors and the mothers who shepherd them like nervous sheepdogs. Your job is to appear charming but not desperate, interested but never forward, all while holding a teacup steady and keeping your petticoat free from grass stains. If you're lucky, you end up seated with fellow spinsters, trading knowing glances and betting on which cousin will be the first to faint from nerves or over-tight corsets. Balls are the season's main event. The music swells, the chandeliers glitter, and the air is thick with hope, nerves, and just a touch of resentment. As an unattached woman, you occupy a peculiar space. Neither the belle of the ball nor the chaperone, but something quietly in between. Occasionally, you're claimed for a dance by an obliging uncle or a bashful younger cousin. Mostly, you hover near the punch bowl, observing the mating rituals with anthropological curiosity. Sometimes, you find yourself paired with another wallflower, and together you invent elaborate backstories for the couples waltzing past, secret engagements, hidden scandals, and at least one case of mistaken identity involving the rector and a particularly convincing disguise. If you do attract the attention of a genuine suitor, perhaps a second son with dreams of colonial adventure or a gentleman with an alarming fondness for model trains, the family's hopes rise, only to be dashed when it becomes clear he's simply after a chess partner. Meanwhile, every mother in the room measures you with the cool gaze of a market-day butcher, weighing your prospects against the latest shipment of eligible daughters from London. But there are perks to being overlooked. You can slip away to the balcony for fresh air and privacy, eavesdrop on whispered scandals, and collect snippets of gossip to entertain your friends for weeks. You become an expert at rescuing the truly hapless, whether it's a shy bachelor trapped by an overzealous matchmaker, or a cousin desperate for an excuse to escape the quadrille of doom. Your role is subtle, invisible, but crucial to the evening's delicate social machinery. By the end of the season, your dance card is barely smudged, your reputation intact, and your freedom preserved. You've survived another parade of forced gaiety, narrow escapes, and dry sandwiches. You celebrate with a long soak, a stolen lemon tart, and the knowledge that you can finally return to the quiet joys of books, friends, and unstructured afternoons. Because in the grand pageant of Victorian society, sometimes the greatest success is to weather the storm unscathed, one glove, one ball, and one polite refusal at a time. If you're not wealthy, and teaching isn't your style, you might end up as a companion, a job that's half paid friend, half highly decorative houseplant. Your duties? Listen, agree, walk slowly through parks, and try not to say anything scandalous while Lady Agatha complains about her bunions. It's a curious occupation, being a Victorian companion. Not quite a servant, not quite a guest. You occupy a social purgatory somewhere between confidant and living ornament. Your main qualifications are a polite nod, a talent for gentle conversation, and a wardrobe that won't outshine your employer. Lady Agatha, or Miss Frobisher, or whichever well-heeled matron has secured your services, doesn't want a rival or a nurse. She wants someone to fill the awkward silences, read aloud when her eyes tire, and provide enthusiastic agreement on matters ranging from embroidery to the scandalous state of her neighbour's shrubbery. The position promises a certain dignity, but the reality is far more complex. At breakfast, you're summoned to the morning room to read the day's newspaper aloud, careful to avoid editorializing unless the topic is the price of butter or a new hat for the Queen. Your companion expects absolute discretion. When she rails against the rising cost of coal or the shocking behavior of the local butcher's daughter, your job is to commiserate with just the right blend of outrage and resignation, all while keeping your true opinions well hidden behind a shield of social pleasantry. Afternoons are devoted to walks through the park, at a pace determined more by the condition of Lady Agatha's joints than your own preferences. Your arm is proffered for support, and your ears are enlisted for a steady stream of complaints about weather, fashion, and the tragic unreliability of young people. You perfect the art of attentive silence, punctuated by occasional "indeed" and "how dreadful." While secretly counting ducks or composing imaginary letters to your friends, social calls can be both a trial and an amusement. You are presented to other ladies as my companion, Miss Woodhouse, so sensible and discreet, after which you are expected to vanish into the wallpaper until needed for card games or as an emergency topic shifter. If Lady Agatha's guests become dull, you are deployed to provide conversation about safe topics. Your childhood, perhaps, or your opinion on rose gardening, always avoiding anything remotely controversial. Should a gentleman enter the room, you automatically fade a few paces back, reappearing only when it's time to fetch the shawl or refill the tea. Companionship, you quickly learn, is also a kind of emotional labor. You are a sponge for grievances, a witness to minor domestic tragedies, and, at times, the scapegoat for any perceived slight from the staff or the vicar. You hear more about gout than you ever wanted to know, and you become intimately familiar with the life histories of everyone from Lady Agatha's fourth cousin to her second-best milliner. Sometimes, in rare moments of honesty, your employer might actually confide something genuine, a memory of lost love, or a fear of growing old alone. In those moments, you glimpse the person behind the role, and your job becomes a little less ornamental, a little more real. And yet, being a companion has its secret perks. Your evenings are mostly your own, with plenty of time for reading, letter writing, or quietly plotting your own escape. You receive a modest wage, the run of a comfortable house, and sometimes the pick of the leftover cakes. There's a kind of freedom in your invisibility. As long as you don't cause scandal, no one expects you to marry, manage a household, or do anything more stressful than remembering the right time to brew chamomile tea. Most of all, you learn to appreciate the absurdity of your position. You become an expert in the delicate ballet of being noticed just enough, but never too much. And in a world where unmarried women are often seen as burdens, you transform your role as a companion into a small act of rebellion, proof that even as a paid friend and part-time houseplant, you can still shape your days, find moments of peace, and, just occasionally, laugh at the whole charade when Lady Agatha isn't looking. So here we are, drifting gently out of the flickering candlelight and endless parlour games of Victorian England, a place where your entire social status could hinge on the number of cats you owned. And tea was both a beverage and a survival mechanism. You've survived another night as the unmarried woman who, against all odds and family sighs, made it to the end of the day, mostly unscathed, if not entirely unjudged. Let's take a moment to honor the absurd resilience of women who lived on the fringes of their own families, who wore last year's fashions with accidental flair and navigated a world determined to remind them of what they weren't. Every awkward dinner, every helpful suggestion from Aunt Prudence, every afternoon spent volunteering for causes you weren't allowed to care about too loudly. These were little acts of defiance, a quiet insistence on existing outside the script, because history, for all its powdered faces and laced-up expectations, is built on people who didn't quite fit the mold, who found freedom in friendship,